I'm going to go into the PRA by clicking here. The one other place I could click on is in the assessment when I'm actually making an assessment. So one of the last buttons you'll see is this same blue button, and you can predefine and preload, if you will, these resources before you even collect the data. Because as I mentioned before, they're going to auto assign based on the student's performance on that assessment. We are now on a new screen. This is the PRA Setup Screen. This layout here is generally the same layout that you'll see. The big difference to note is the first time you go into your PRA Setup Screen, these tiles, which are these little highlighted areas here, will be bare or blank, more or less. These have already been loaded with the assignments. We've already assigned and added activities here. But otherwise, the overall layout is pretty much what any user will see. So let me just quickly orient us to this layout here. At the very top, you see a default name for this PRA. It's named after the assessment that it's linked to. If you want to personalize it more, you simply click on that pencil and you add that personal touch to it. Right beneath it, there's actually that icon, that PRA icon, which if you hover over, as you can see, shows me a link, and that link goes to the company's support page. And that support page has all the technical details. It has all the levels, the in the weeds kind of content and details for every single one of these features, anywhere where you can click or control or choose or adjust. I'm giving you just enough to set you up for startup and for that first implementation success here. But if you ever have questions or want to know more, this is a good place to go and find that information. Along that same row, you'll see the star icon and the amount of points earned by the whole class, total stars. As I mentioned before, it's gamified. Students will see little creatures and figures. They'll see stars flying around the screen as they complete activities. There's a universal save button here, and then there is a student preview that allows you to pop up in a new window what these activities that you're setting up will look like in the student's experience in their portals. I'm not going to use this one because I'm actually going to demonstrate going in as a student, so we could talk about setting them up for successful access to these activities as well.
Sir?
Yes, please.
I have a question. I lost somewhere when we go to the test, we can see the test result. And how did you reach here at formative assessment? Or
I'm back on this tab. It's the blue icon on the top right-hand corner. So
yes.
If you're staring at test results for whichever test you're on, it's that blue button, the PRA button. You simply click on it, and as long as you don't have pop-ups or anything, you might have a pop-up disabled, since we're in Chrome, that you might need to just enable it for this screen. Though honestly, I think it would have already triggered before we even got this far. So clicking on this blue button will open a new window and take you to a screen similar to this. It won't be exactly the same, but it'll be similar to the one I'm showing.
Okay, thank you.
All righty. Any other questions?
And these are connected according to the students learning their data, according to their result, proficiency and highly proficient or low?
Great question. These are going to be specific to the performance in terms of percent correct. So it's not so much looking at whether or not what performance level the student achieved, and take into account that not all assessments have that level or that kind of defined performance levels, but every assessment has percent correct. And not every assessment has standards assessed or defining which questions are measuring which standards. That you may have an assessment, a teacher-created assessment that's not aligned to any specific standards, and it's just some questions that you're asking. And so when that's not defined, the difference is you'll see this tile for challenge activities. This is a tile that lets you still assign some activities, albeit not standards based.
Okay.
You only see this kind of tile with the standard in it when it's defined in the assessment. So we can tell that this assessment, 5RL2HL formative, is assessing this standard, which is named after the same, shares the name of the code for that standard. And when I hover over this, it will show me the description of the standard. And that's where I'm able to see, oh, it's about determining the theme of a story, so on and so forth. The other things that will automatically populate when you're linking when you're accessing the PRA for an assessment that's defining standards or assessing standards, I should say, is you'll also see in that tile how many questions were on that assessment for that standard. Now, when there aren't any activities yet, this will be blank and it'll say, click here to add activities. I also have another blue button over here that lets me add more challenge activities similar to this one that aren't standard specific, but nonetheless can still be related to a standard that I choose. Now there's a lot of flexibility here. Even though the assessment was on grade level 5 reading literature standards, and this tile is telling me, hey, whatever activities I put here in this tile are going to be associated with this standard, I have the flexibility as an Ex Ed resource teacher that if I know my students are not yet functioning at grade 5, that grade level with this standard, I can select or add resources that are closer to that student's instructional level. And so I can actually search for things that might not be this particular grade level here. Now, just to finish the quick tour of what we're seeing here, the rest of the things that you're seeing on this tile that's already had activities assigned to it are how many stars or points it's worth to complete all of these activities for this standard. This is a default setting. Yes, you can go in and control for it, and if you really want to learn how to do that, remember that click here or the other resources from the TAR. But otherwise, just trust that it'll still gamify it for the student without you really having to do that level of tinkering and setup on your end. It'll also show a quick little abbreviation bubble for any resources or activities associated with this standard in this tile. In this case, there is a constructed response part that's one of the activities for this. And I'll pop this open to show you what that is in more detail momentarily. There's also an online resource. Anytime they just use the word resource, they're really referring to an online resource, a linked resource. That could be a video. That could be another website. It could be some other kind of content, very customizable, that I'll show you momentarily. This red asterisk on this tile is indicating that I'm overriding whatever the student performance is. In other words, it doesn't matter anymore if a student actually got 100%. There still will be assigned these activities and will have the opportunity to practice and access and complete this PRA. So there are some controls built in there that say, oh, well, I don't know if this will necessarily go to a student because I'm not quite sure how the student will do on this assessment. Well, I'll just make sure it's there. And that's one way you can do that. This 4 arrow icon allows me to rearrange where it's set up or the sequencing. Right now, is kind of showing that this student will see this as their activity number 1, their first activity. Since I did define a challenge activity, there's a link, a resource link, and that's what it's letting me know right here in this little preview section of it. It's worth 8 stars by default. And again, it's a resource. It doesn't have the red asterisk. So right now, all students who are rostered to me who complete this assessment will have to complete, when they access their PRA, they'll have to complete this activity and will not have to complete this activity. I could go in and override this activity as well and say, hey, I want it required for all students too, if I wanted to. There are some advanced settings. We'll just take a quick peek at them here momentarily. But for now, just note that this lets me control for things. Actually, let me open real quick so I don't forget as I double back. This can let me control for things like, well, what are the minimum and maximum required activities if I want to adjust for that? So I can even control for that here. This is a default threshold. Remember the question earlier was, so how does this get assigned? Is it based on performance level? And I mentioned it's % correct. It's actually 100% correct. The threshold for students, basically, if what will trigger this to be automatically assigned and placed in their portals in the students' SchoolCity accounts is if they fail to achieve 100% on any particular standard that they're assessed. If you're thinking, wow, that's a high bar and I want to be a little bit more gracious, I do want to give some flexibility to some of the learners that I service who are actually doing fairly well with this, you can override and just type in what you want and say, actually, the tripping threshold is now 80%. So only the students who don't meet this % correct for the standard assessed will be auto-assigned this PRA and actually see this in their account. But by default, it's saying they've got to be absolutely phenomenal to not be auto-assigned this standards-based activity. And then there are even more advanced assignment options, but we just don't have the time to go that far in the weeds with all of this. The final little section of this screen, the layout, includes what's called the class activity, and it has different kind of visuals that just very simply show you the last time students were actually interacting and accessing this particular PRA, regardless of the activities, the time they spent in the PRA, and the score % is not necessarily are they right, are they wrong. This isn't a new assessment. It's not meant to give them new test scores. It really is meant for reteach, review, and enrichment opportunities. So this score is really more based on the completion, that how many activities have they completed. And then you can either hide results or show them down here to see the actual details of which students were last in there when and for how long, how many activities have they attempted and completed, and what portion did they complete. Questions about this layout before I demonstrate the adding of activities and go over that?
There aren't any questions in chat, so unless somebody else has a question.
Okay. All right. And if you think of it after I start, feel free to chime in. That's fine. All right. So adding activities here. I'm actually going to go into some pre-made activities to show you and orient you to the tiles. Each of these tiles behaves or looks very similarly once you click on them. Once you click on a tile, they'll look very similar to this screen here. This is usually what you'll see in terms of if it's a standards-based tile, again, that standard will just automatically show up here in the corner. You can hover over it to read the description of it. It will, regardless of what kind of tile it is, you'll have these 3 dots, which is where you can delete it all, or this is where I can flip that switch and say it doesn't matter how students perform on this assessment. They will all be required to complete this assignment once they access this PRA. And that produces that red asterisk there that I mentioned before. Your save and close for the activities in this PRA tile. A little delete just for this part here. We're on part 1, which is going to default to a resource, an online resource. And when you have a standard and it's a standards-based activity, you're going to be able to utilize these resource filters here. And what they'll do, the way that they'll behave, if you will, when it's a standards-based tile is when I click on any one of these, it will basically already filter that site and search that site based on this code here, this standard code. So for example, if I click on this Open Ed resource, it's going to already splash that standard that I'm looking for. and show me the results. And it'll just kind of, it's a faster way to help me find resources when I'm searching for them. I can preview them. I can choose them right from here. I can see a little bit more details about just a little thumbnail on them, a brief description or a starting description, the type of activity it is. This is the one I ended up choosing. And when you choose it, it'll pre-populate the required viewing time or activity time based on the video length. If this isn't what I'm looking for, or I have a learner who's not quite at this level of sophistication with this standard, they might be in 3rd grade dealing with the 3rd grade iteration of this particular standard, I can type into this keyword search that code for 3.rl.2, which is basically the 3rd grade version of comprehending the main idea or themes, if you will. And you'll see that it shows me the resources associated with this resource here, this particular site, Open Ed. And again, same format, and I can choose these. So I can assign at the 3rd grade level content to my learners who are enrolled in the 5th grade, but whose instructional levels are not yet there. So it has that level of flexibility. I'm not going to choose these in this because we've already done, so I'm just going to cancel this out here. But once you choose, it auto-populates the URL in this field and gives you a little preview when it's available of it. I can choose whether I want to open this, the student to have to open the resource in a new window or tab, or leave it blank and allow it to open within the same screen that they're already in when they first access this PRA. I can override the amount of time. I chose a video that's 1 minute and 57 seconds. When I first selected it, that auto-populated here. But I went in and said, you know what? They only need to be in, for the purpose of this demo, I picked 10 seconds. But as you'll see, this required viewing time is misleading. It won't hold them fully accountable to engaging and interacting with this activity. And I'll illustrate what I mean by that momentarily. Really what this is just a means of indicating in the system that they've completed this activity, because there's not another way for them to really track for that. So this is the tracking method. So that score percent that you'll be able to see when you monitor class activity will be based on them basically being in this activity for at least this amount of time. And so this URL, before I go into the next piece here, sorry, I scrolled too quickly. This URL, I can actually copy and paste. I do not have to use these preset resource filters. I can copy and paste my own. I can be so customized, so highly customized, that I can put in shared links that are granting access to the students to content that I developed and customized in my Office 365 account using an Office 365 application or program, such as Word or PowerPoint. And we'll revisit that. We'll actually illustrate a little bit of that momentarily. But that's how customizable this is. So in reference back to, well, what about certain lesson plans, activities? You can push them right back to a previously taught lesson, or and some visuals or links or audio or video or stuff like that to have them to address reteaching, support reteaching of that previously taught instruction. I can add activity parts to this same tile. So I can add activities either as their own individual challenge activity tiles, or within this one tile that's all associated already with this standard, I can add multiple parts to it. I can reorder them with this little icon, the 4 arrows here. I added that constructed response here. I simply type my question or copy and paste it from another document. The student completes this activity part simply by typing in the field. It's an open-ended constructed response. This will not grade or score the correctness of response. It simply will detect that they've typed in the field. So here's another area where we have to be mindful and cognizant and be ready to teach ahead of that, to build the student's capacity and agency to meaningfully interact with and complete this kind of activity. You can add general feedback. It's not going to be specific to any one student. Any student who completes this part will see this feedback, whatever you type. You can add that other activity part here, either more links, more constructed response open-ended questions, or the third type of activity is this multiple choice. And it's similar, it's a sleek, simple setup, user-friendly interface here where either I type directly in or I copy and paste into this field. I type or copy and paste in here for the choices. I could leave it as one choice. I could just say, you know, watch the video, click here when you finish watching it. And this is another form of kind of accountability to build into it if you want. Or you can add in several choices and make it more of a traditional, if you will, multiple choice. It is the one place where the way the point system is default set is it will give them more points if they get it right the first time than versus the next time. But this is really the only place, and again, it's not meant to grade, it's meant to have that gamified experience for the student. I could add more general final feedback here, similar to this constructed response final feedback that every student will see when they complete this. Once I hit save and close, it adds all of this and then results in that tile the way that we see it now. I'm actually going to take this part off, save it and close it, and this is the end result of what you see. So that's adding activities. That's an introduction to adding activities. Any questions about that?
There aren't currently any questions in chat, so unless anybody jumps in.
Okay, all right, no problem. Here's what this challenge activity looks like that I set up. When I click on this tile, again, it has that similar, it has resource filters. However, if I click on one of these, they're not going to be associated with any standard. It's just called activity, the challenge activity here. And so it will be an open-ended search, if you will. Just mainly it'll just link me to this site, and then I can start to use the little search fields to be specific. But here's where you'll notice I copied and pasted from some content that I created in my Office 365 account. And you can tell that because of this part of the URL here. And so this is just how flexible this activity could be. If I wanted to, I could click up here again, turn this switch on, and make it required for everyone. And then it would have the red asterisk. I'm going to go ahead and leave it optional for this purpose of this demo. I've got it set up to open in a new window. You'll see that on the student end momentarily. I've adjusted the viewing time for this. It didn't know, so it defaulted to 2 minutes, but I went ahead again for the purpose of this demo and set 10 seconds. And I could, again, likewise, add more parts if I wanted to here. I'm going to go ahead and save and close here. I'm going to quickly just show you adding an activity from scratch. This particular activity lets me be super flexible. I can start at any point here. And again, if I start with the link, the one difference here is this activity, it default names itself to challenge activity 2. You can do things here a little more customized where you can say, you know, this is more on theme, or tag it again with the standard code, even though it won't make these filters down here behave differently. It's still going to be an open-ended search, really. But that's just kind of the starting from scratch view there. Let's actually go ahead and not add that at this point here.